The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden streaks over the little town of Maplewood, where life moved at the pace of a slow, winding river. In the heart of this quiet place lived a woman named Lily, soft-spoken, warm-hearted, and known for her patience. She wasn't the kind to rush into things, especially not love. But when Daniel came into her life, everything changed in the gentlest way possible. Daniel was a man of few words, his presence like the steady hum of a distant train there, but easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. He didn't laugh loudly at gatherings or boast about his achievements. Instead, he listened, his dark eyes thoughtful, his hands always busy with some small task. People whispered about him, as people in small towns do. They said he was odd, that he never courted women, that perhaps there was something missing in him. The word they used, in hushed tones behind raised hands, was impotent. Lily had heard the rumors, of course. But she didn't care. She wasn't marrying Daniel for what he could or couldn't do in the dark of night. She was marrying him because he was kind, because he was the only one who noticed when her hands were cold and silently offered his gloves. Because he remembered the way she took her tea, even though she'd only told him once. Because when she spoke, he didn't just nod, he heard her. The wedding was a small affair, just family and a few close friends beneath the old oak tree in the churchyard. Lily wore her mother's lace dress, the fabric whispering against her skin like a secret. Daniel stood tall in his simple suit, his fingers trembling slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, he didn't kiss her passionately like the heroes in storybooks. Instead, he pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead, as if sealing a promise. That evening, as the last of the guests trickled out and the house settled into silence, Lily prepared herself for what she believed would be a quiet, uneventful night. She changed into her nightgown, brushed her hair, and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for Daniel to finish washing up. She expected nothing more than conversation, maybe a shy goodnight kiss. After all, she had married a man who everyone including her believed had no desire for a physical marriage. But when Daniel stepped into the room, something was different. The air between them crackled, like the moment before a summer storm. His eyes, usually so calm, burned with an intensity that made Lily's breath catch. He crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, his hand reaching for hers. And then, he proved her wrong. Not with words, not with boasts, but with actions so deliberate, so certain, that Lily realized in a dizzying rush that she had misunderstood him completely. The rumors, the assumptions, the quiet pity from her friends, none of it had been true. Daniel was no less a man than any other. He had simply been waiting for her, for this moment. And as the night unfolded, Lily's cheeks burned not with embarrassment, but with the startling realization that her marriage was going to be very different from what she had imagined. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains like an uninvited guest, spilling pale gold across the tangled sheets and the two figures lying in breathless silence. Lily stared at the ceiling, her heart still pounding in a rhythm that matched the fading pulse of the night before. Her skin hummed with the memory of Daniel's touch, firm, insistent, knowing so utterly unlike the hesitant man she thought she had married. The air smelled of sweat and something sweet like crushed petals. She turned her head slightly, studying the curve of Daniel's shoulder in the dim light, the way his chest rose and fell in steady, satisfied waves. Who even was this man? The question coiled in her mind, tightening with every passing second. All those months of courtship, all those quiet walks and murmured conversations, and never once had he given her reason to doubt the rumors. He'd held her hand with a tenderness that bordered on reverence, kissed her cheek like she was made of glass. She'd believed no, she'd accepted that theirs would be a marriage of companionship, of shared silences and whispered dreams in the dark. A life without the complications of desire. Yet, last night had been complications. Daniel stirred beside her, his lashes fluttering open. For a moment, his gaze was unfocused, soft with sleep. Then he saw her watching him, and something flickered in his eyes, something like guilt or maybe relief. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Lily swallowed. "Yes." Beat of silence. The house creaked around them, the sound too loud in the stillness. "Are you?" Daniel hesitated, then reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Are you all right?" The question was so painfully Daniel careful, considerate that Lily almost laughed. Here was a man who could unravel her with a single touch, and yet he still worried about her comfort. She pulled her hand away, sitting up abruptly. The sheets pooled around her waist, cool against her heated skin. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Daniel went very still. "Tell you what?" "Don't." Lily's voice was sharper than she intended. "Don't pretend you don't know what I mean. Everyone said you let me think." She broke off, her throat tightening. Daniel sat up slowly, the sheets falling away from his torso. In the pale light, the scars she'd traced with her lips last night stood out like silver threads against his skin. He didn't rush to explain, didn't fill the silence with empty words. He just waited, his eyes steady on hers until she found her voice again. "I thought you couldn't, that you didn't." She couldn't say it. The word impotent stuck in her throat, ugly and cruel. Daniel exhaled, long and slow. "I know what you thought. Then why?" Lily's hands fisted in the sheets. "Why let me believe it?" For the first time since she'd met him, Daniel looked uncertain. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it tousled, boyish. "When my father died," he began quietly, "the women in town brought casseroles to our house for weeks. They patted my mother's shoulder and called her brave. But the moment she wasn't listening, they whispered about how she'd wasted her best years on a man who left her with nothing." His mouth twisted. "Not even a son who could inherit the farm." Lily blinked. "What does that have to do with?" "People see what they want to see," Daniel interrupted gently. "If they think I'm lacking, then they don't look too close. They don't wonder why a man like me stays quiet. They don't ask questions." A chill crept down Lily's spine. "What are you hiding?" Daniel's smile was faint, almost sad. "Nothing dangerous. Just myself." He reached for her again, this time cupping her cheek. "I wanted you to love me for me. Not for what I could give you, or what people said I couldn't." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Last night wasn't about proving anything. It was just us." Lily searched his face, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the faint crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the way his bottom lip caught slightly between his teeth when he was nervous. This man who had loved her so thoroughly, so deliberately, in the dark. And suddenly she understood. Daniel hadn't been testing her. He'd been trusting her. The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. She covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm harder against her face. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice thick. "I did love you for you." Daniel's breath caught. Then, slowly, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. "I know," he murmured. "That's why I showed you the rest." Outside, a bird began to sing, its melody bright and clear in the morning air. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. The world was waking up. But for now, in this sunlit room, there was only them. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and unspoken questions. Lily moved through them like a woman caught in a dream, half present, half lost in the whirlwind of her own thoughts. She would catch herself staring at Daniel across the breakfast table, watching the way his fingers curled around his coffee cup, remembering how those same fingers had traced constellations along her skin just hours before. He would look up, meet her gaze, and something unreadable would flicker in his eyes before he smiled. Soft, tentative, as if waiting for her to decide something. But decide what? That was the problem. Lily didn't know what to think anymore. The rumors had been so certain. The whole town had whispered it, nodded knowingly behind their hands. Poor Daniel, such a shame. A man like that, and yet, she'd believed them. Worse, she'd pitied him. And now she lay awake at night, her body still humming from the things he'd taught her. Her mind reeling with the realization that she'd married a stranger. A stranger who knew her better than anyone ever had. It was maddening. She tried to distract herself, scrubbed the floors until her knees ached, baked loaf after loaf of bread until the kitchen smelled like a bakery. But no amount of busy work could quiet the voice in her head that whispered, "What else don't you know about him?" One afternoon, while Daniel was out tending to the fields, Lily found herself standing in front of his dresser, her fingers hovering over the small wooden box he kept tucked beneath his socks. She'd seen him open it once, early in their marriage, when he thought she wasn't looking. He'd taken something out, a letter, maybe, and held it for a long moment before tucking it away again. His expression unreadable. She shouldn't. It was a violation, plain and simple. But the question burned hotter than guilt. The box opened with a quiet creak. Inside, nestled atop a folded handkerchief, was a photograph, faded at the edges, worn smooth from handling. A younger Daniel stared back at her, his arm slung around the shoulders of a boy who shared his eyes but not his quiet demeanor. The boy was grinning, wild and bright, his hair sticking up in all directions like he'd just run through a windstorm. On the back, in careful script, "James and me. Summer '08. Lily's breath caught. James. Daniel had never mentioned a brother. The sound of the front door opening sent her scrambling to replace the photo, her heart pounding. By the time Daniel stepped into the bedroom, sweat damp and smelling of hay, the box was back in its place, and Lily was sitting primly on the bed, mending a tear in one of his shirts. "You're home early," she said, her voice too bright. Daniel studied her for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the shirt in her lap, his shirt, the one he'd torn weeks ago and hadn't gotten around to fixing. Something unreadable flickered across his face. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her hard, desperate, like he was trying to erase something between them. Lily melted into it, her confusion momentarily forgotten. But when he pulled away, his forehead resting against hers, his next words sent a chill down her spine. "Ask me," he whispered. "Whatever it is you want to know. Just ask." For a heartbeat, Lily considered pretending. But the weight of the photograph, of all the unspoken things between them, was too heavy to carry alone. "Who's James?" Daniel went very still. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of him, he sat back on his heels. "My brother," he said at last. "You never told me you had a brother." "He died." The words were flat, final. "A long time ago." Lily reached for him instinctively, but Daniel caught her hand, his grip just shy of painful. "There's more," he said, his voice rough. "But you have to understand, I didn't lie to you, Lily. Not about who I am. I just left some parts out." Outside, a storm was rolling in. The first drops of rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the distance, thunder growled. And Lily, staring into the eyes of the man she'd married, realized with a sinking certainty that the rumors had never been the problem. The real danger was the truth. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the dirt roads of Maplewood into rivers of mud and the fields into shallow, trembling lakes. Inside the little farmhouse, the air was thick with the scent of damp wool and wood smoke, the fire in the hearth struggling against the creeping chill. Lily sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold, staring at the photograph Daniel had finally let her keep. "James." His smile was a slash of brightness against the faded paper. His eyes crinkled with laughter. He looked like the kind of boy who would climb trees too tall, swim in rivers too fast, dare the world to keep up with him. The kind of boy who would leave a hole behind him the shape of a scream when he was gone. Daniel had told her the rest of it last night, his voice barely above a whisper in the dark. A hunting accident. A gun misfired. James had been 14. Daniel 16. Their father had sent them out together that morning, bring us back something good for supper, and only Daniel had come home. "It wasn't my fault," he'd said, the words cracking like ice underfoot. "But it doesn't matter. Fault doesn't change the outcome." Lily traced the edge of the photograph now, her throat tight. She understood suddenly why Daniel had let the rumors flourish. A man who couldn't father children was pitted. A man who'd gotten his brother killed. That was a different kind of story altogether. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Sophia stood on the porch, her cloak sodden with rain, her cheeks flushed from the walk. "I brought you some jam," she said, holding out a jar wrapped in cloth. "Blackberry. Your favorite." Lily forced a smile. "Come in. You're soaked through." Sophia bustled inside, shaking water from her sleeves. "I just had to see you," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The whole town is talking." A prickle of unease crawled up Lily's spine. "About what?" Sophia's eyes gleamed. "About you, darling. About him." She nodded toward the bedroom, where Daniel was sleeping off the exhaustion of a night spent wrestling with ghosts. "People are saying he's not what he seemed. That she broke off, biting her lip. "Spit it out, Sophia." "That he tricked you," Sophia whispered. "Married you under false pretenses. Everyone thought he was well, you know. And now they're saying he must have known what people thought, and let them believe it. That it's not right, a man deceiving his wife like that." Lily's fingers tightened around the photograph. The irony was almost laughable. They were right in a way. Daniel had deceived her, just not in the way they thought. Sophia mistook her silence for distress. "Oh, Lily," she sighed, reaching for her hand. "You don't have to pretend with me. If you're unhappy, if you want to leave." "I'm not leaving." The words came out sharper than Lily intended. Sophia blinked. "He's my husband," Lily said, standing abruptly. The chair legs scraped against the floor like a challenge. "What happens between us is nobody's business but ours." For a moment Sophia just stared at her. Then her expression hardened. "I'm only trying to help," she said stiffly. "But if you'd rather stand by a man who lied to you." "He didn't lie." "Then what do you call it?" Lily opened her mouth to say what, she wasn't sure. "The truth. A half-truth." But before she could speak, a floorboard creaked behind her. Daniel stood in the doorway. His hair rumpled from sleep, his shirt half-buttoned. The scars on his chest, the ones Lily had kissed just last night, were visible in the gaping fabric. His gaze flicked from Lily to Sophia, then back again. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Sophia's eyes dropped to his scars, to the way Lily's fingers still clutched the photograph. Something like understanding dawned in her face. Then, just as quickly, it twisted into something else entirely. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, Lily." And just like that, Lily knew. The rumors were about to get worse. Much worse. Daniel stepped forward, his hand finding the small of Lily's back. "Solid. Steady." "Sophia," he said, nodding. "Good to see you." Sophia's smile was all teeth. "Likewise." She turned back to Lily. "We'll talk later," she murmured, squeezing her arm. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with terrible finality. The silence in her wake was deafening. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That went well." Lily didn't laugh. She was too busy staring at the photograph in her hands, at the boy who would never grow up, at the brother her husband had loved and lost. The real problem wasn't the rumors, she realized. It was that some of them might be true. The whispers slithered through Maplewood like smoke, curling under doors and slipping through cracks until they filled every corner of the town. By Sunday morning they had reached the church steps, where the good people of Maplewood gathered in their finest hats and most pious expressions, casting sideways glances at the empty pew where Lily and Daniel usually sat. Lily had wanted to come. "We've done nothing wrong," she'd insisted, her hands fists at her sides. But Daniel had taken one look at the storm brewing in her eyes and gently steered her back toward the kitchen. "Let me handle this," he'd murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Stay here. Bake something. Break every dish if you have to. But let me go alone." Now, standing at the back of the church, Daniel felt the weight of every staring eye like a physical touch. The preacher's sermon droned on something about forgiveness, about casting stones, but the air was thick with unspoken accusations. Then, just as the final hymn began, Sophia stood. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. The rustle of her skirts was enough to hush the room. "Pastor," she said, sweet as poisoned honey, Don't you think we ought to pray for our dear Lily? It's so hard being married to a man who isn't truthful. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Someone tittered. Daniel's hands clenched. The pastor cleared his throat. Now, Sophia, let's not. I'm just concerned, Sophia sighed, pressing a hand to her heart. A marriage built on lies. Well, it's not what our Lily deserves. That was when Daniel moved. He didn't push through the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked slow, deliberate down the center aisle until he stood before the pulpit, turning to face the sea of upturned faces. For a long moment he said nothing. Let them look. Let them see the man they'd pitied, the man they'd whispered about. And you're right, he said, so quietly they had to lean in to hear. Lily doesn't deserve lies. A satisfied smirk curled Sophia's lips. Daniel ignored her. But the lie wasn't mine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph James, grinning and alive, forever 14. The lie was believing that grief makes a man less. That mourning my brother, carrying his memory, made me broken. His voice cracked. I let you think what you wanted because it was easier than telling the truth. But Lily. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. She saw through me from the start. The church was utterly silent. Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it again as old Mrs. Peabody stood, her cane thumping against the floor. I knew James, she said, her voice quavering but firm. Sweet boy. Terrible accident. She fixed Sophia with a glare. Shame on you, stirring up trouble when this family's suffered enough. One by one, others nodded. A few even had the decency to look ashamed. Daniel didn't wait for apologies. He simply tucked the photograph back into his pocket and walked out, the weight of a decade's silence finally lifted from his shoulders. The rain had stopped. Sunlight spilled through the clouds, turning the puddles to gold. Somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. The summer heat clung to Maplewood like a second skin, thick and suffocating, pressing down on the fields until the wheat bowed under its weight. Inside the farmhouse, the air was heavy with the scent of lavender and rising bread. Lily's latest attempt to calm the storm brewing in her stomach. She stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting absently on her abdomen, the other gripping the edge of the counter as another wave of nausea rolled through her. 3 months. 3 months since the confrontation at the church. 3 months since the town had turned its scrutiny from Daniel's supposed impotence to his tragic past, dissecting his grief with the same relentless curiosity they'd once reserved for his imagined inadequacies. The rumors had shifted, softened at the edges. Poor Daniel, losing his brother like that, but Lily had seen the way their eyes still lingered, still whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. And now this. The doctor had confirmed it just that morning, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight as he patted her hand and declared her in perfect health, my dear, perfectly normal for a woman in your condition. Condition. The word sat like a stone in Lily's chest. The screen door creaked open behind her, letting in a rush of heat and the familiar scent of sun-warmed hay. Daniel's boots thudded against the floorboards, his steps slowing as he took in the rigid line of her shoulders. Lily. She didn't turn. Couldn't. If she looked at him now, she'd either burst into tears or scream, and she wasn't sure which would be worse. A calloused hand settled gently on her waist. Talk to me, Daniel murmured, his breath warm against her neck. Lily closed her eyes. I'm pregnant. The words hung between them, taut as a wire. Daniel went very still. Then slowly, his hand slid around to splay across her stomach, his touch so light it was barely there at all. Oh, he breathed. It wasn't joy in his voice. It wasn't fear. It was something far more complicated, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the seismic shift this would bring. Lily finally turned to face him, her throat tight. Are you terrified? Daniel finished, his mouth quirking in a half-smile. Yes. His thumb brushed her hip bone. But not for the reasons you think. She knew what he meant. Knew the memory that haunted him, James' laughter, the crack of a gunshot, the terrible silence that followed. knew that the idea of fatherhood, of being responsible for another life, was a ghost he'd never fully laid to rest. "You won't lose this one," Lily said softly, pressing her hand over his. Daniel's eyes darkened. "I know," he said, but the way his fingers tightened against her belly told another story. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree where James' initials were still carved into the bark. Somewhere beneath their feet, the earth hummed with the promise of new growth, of roots digging deep and branches reaching for the sky. Life, stubborn and relentless, went on. And so would they. The first snow of winter dusted Maplewood in a hush of white, softening the edges of the world until even the sharpest memories seemed to blur at the edges. Inside the farmhouse, warmth seeped from every crack and crevice, the fire in the hearth crackling, the kettle on the stove singing softly to itself, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and pine. And beneath it all, beneath the quiet hum of ordinary life, was the sound that had come to define Lily's days. The tiny, insistent wail of a newborn. Rose. Daniel had chosen the name one sleepless night, his calloused finger tracing the curve of the baby's cheek as she dozed in his arms. "After the wild roses by the creek," he'd murmured, his voice rough with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite joy, but something in between. "James and I used to pick them for my mother." Lily had kissed his shoulder and said nothing. Some wounds never fully closed, but they could, over time, become easier to carry. Now, as she rocked Rose by the fire, the weight of the past year settled over her like a well-worn shawl. The rumors had died down at last, starved of the oxygen they needed to survive. Sophia, ever the opportunist, had redirected her attention to the new schoolteacher's scandalously short hemline. The town had moved on, and so had they. The door creaked open, letting in a flurry of snowflakes and Daniel, his cheeks ruddy with cold, his arms laden with firewood. He kicked the door shut behind him and grinned at the sight of them, Lily in her rocking chair, Rose bundled in a quilt stitched by Daniel's mother years ago. "She's quiet," he observed, shrugging out of his coat. "For now," Lily laughed, just as Rose's face scrunched in warning. Daniel crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping the wood with a clatter and scooping the baby into his arms before the first cry could fully escape. "Ah, none of that," he chided gently, bouncing her against his chest. "Your mama needs a moment's peace." Lily watched them, her heart so full it ached. This man who had carried his grief like a second shadow, who had let the world believe he was less than he was, this man was a father now, and he was magnificent at it. Rose hiccuped, her tiny fist curling around Daniel's thumb. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the fields, the fences, the old oak tree with its hidden carvings. The world was starting anew, one flake at a time. And inside by the fire so were they. Want more heartwarming stories? If you've enjoyed following Lily and Daniel's journey from misunderstanding to unshakable love, don't miss out on future tales of resilience, redemption, and the quiet triumphs of ordinary people. Subscribe now to stay updated whenever a new story drops, because everyone deserves a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that love, in all its messy, unexpected forms, is always worth fighting for. Hit that subscribe button, and let's keep the magic of storytelling alive together. Your next favorite adventure is just a click away. Until next time.
The Grand Hotel, named the Ethelred, was a silent kingdom of marble and money. Its hallways were so vast and empty they seemed to swallow sound itself, leaving behind only the faint, clean scent of wealth and the whisper of air conditioning. It was in this temple of quiet luxury that a most unwelcome noise began to echo. It was the sound of a single determined artist at work, a sound that was about to shatter the peaceful world of the man who owned it all. Sebastian was a man who had learned to measure his life in silent transactions and the soft closing of expensive doors. He was young for a millionaire, but the weight of his fortune had aged his spirit, carving lines of solitude around his eyes that no amount of money could erase. His penthouse at the top of the Ethelred was a beautiful prison, all sharp angles and cold glass, offering a perfect view of a city he never truly felt a part of. On this particular Tuesday, a report of a scheduling delay had drawn him down from his tower, a minor irritation in his otherwise perfectly controlled calendar. The new mural for the main promenade was behind schedule. Meanwhile, high above the polished floor, Lucia was lost in a world of her own creation. Perched confidently on a wide wooden scaffold, she was a splash of vibrant life against the sterile beige wall. Her hair, a tumble of dark curls, was hastily tied back, and a smudge of cerulean blue paint adorned her cheek like a warrior's mark. She didn't paint the wall, she battled it, wrestling a universe of color and form from her imagination onto its blank, intimidating surface. The mural was to be a sprawling, magical forest, and with every sweep of her brush she breathed life into it, emerald leaves seeming to tremble, a hidden fox peeking from behind a tree, a stream that almost looked like it could babble. The headphones over her ears drowned out the world of the Ethelred, replacing it with a private symphony that guided her hand. She was not an employee here. For these hours she was a creator, and this hallway was her domain. Sebastian entered the promenade and stopped. The sight that greeted him was not what he had expected. He was prepared to find a team of workers, but he found only one. A woman, utterly consumed by her task, her back to him. He stood for a long moment, waiting for her to notice his presence. He was Sebastian after all. People always noticed him. They would turn, their posture would change, their voices would take on a new, careful tone. But this woman did not turn. She simply reached for a different can of paint, her movements fluid and sure. A faint, unfamiliar feeling prickled at him, annoyance perhaps, or something closer to curiosity. He cleared his throat, a sound that usually commanded immediate attention. Lucia, feeling a vibration through the scaffold planks, paused her brushstroke. She pulled one headphone away from her ear, resting it on her shoulder, but did not turn around. "If you're here about the vent filters, they're already replaced. You can check the log," she said, her voice clear and practical, devoid of any deference. She dipped her brush back into the paint. Sebastian's eyebrows rose slightly. "I am not here about the vents," he said, his voice calm and measured, a voice used to giving orders that were never questioned. This time Lucia did turn, but slowly. She looked down from her high perch, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were a warm, intelligent brown, and they held no recognition, only a mild impatience at the interruption. She saw a man in a suit that probably cost more than her entire set of scaffolding. He was handsome, she supposed, in a sharp, polished way like a statue in a museum. "Okay," she said simply. "Then how can I help you? I'm on a tight schedule." "I am Sebastian," he said, expecting the name to land with its usual weight. "This is my hotel." Lucia gave a small, single nod. "Lucia. The muralist. I'll be done by Friday as per the contract." And with that, she seemed to consider the conversation over. She turned back to her forest, ready to disappear into it once more. A strange, almost forgotten sensation stirred within Sebastian. He was being dismissed. Ignored. It was so utterly bizarre that he found himself taking a step closer to the scaffold. "The design," he began, grasping for a reason to prolong this unusual interaction. "I was curious about the vision. The proposal was somewhat abstract." Lucia sighed inwardly, but something in his tone, a genuine note of inquiry, not just criticism, made her turn back. She wiped her hands on a cloth stained with a rainbow of colors. "It's not abstract," she explained, her voice losing its edge and warming to her subject. "It's a memory. It's the forest behind my grandmother's house, where I used to play as a kid. See the way the light falls through the branches here?" She pointed with her brush. "That's the late afternoon sun in July. And the mushrooms at the base of this oak? They're the kind we were always told were fairy rings." She looked at him, her passion for her work shining in her eyes, making her face luminous. "It's not just a picture of a forest. It's a feeling. It's the feeling of being safe and hidden and completely free." Sebastian was silent. He looked from her animated face to the wall, and for the first time he saw it. He saw the dappled sunlight, he felt the imagined coolness of the shade. He saw the story she was telling. No one had ever spoken to him about a feeling in one of his properties. They spoke of ROI, square footage, and aesthetic appeal. They never spoke of fairy rings and grandmothers. He was captivated. "You're capturing it perfectly," he said, and the words surprised him with their sincerity. The compliment, so plainly given, seemed to surprise her too. A slight blush touched her cheeks beneath the paint smudge. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "It's easier to capture a memory than to invent one from nothing." They looked at each other for a moment longer, the air between them seeming to change, charged with a new and unspoken understanding. The silent millionaire and the vibrant artist, connected by a painted forest on a vast, empty wall. Then, breaking the spell, Lucia gently placed the headphone back over her ear, the faint thump of her music cutting off the outside world once more. She gave him one last small smile before turning back to her work, her entire being focusing back on the stroke of her brush. Sebastian did not move. He stood there in the middle of his multi-million-dollar hallway and watched her. He watched the sure, confident movement of her arm, the way she tilted her head as she studied her work. The silence of the hotel returned, but it was a different silence now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of the woman on the scaffold, with the scent of her paints, with the echo of her words about safety and freedom. The minor irritation that had brought him down here was gone, replaced by a profound and unsettling curiosity. He finally turned and walked away, but as the elevator doors closed on him, his thoughts were not on schedules or budgets. They were entirely, completely on Lucia. The polished silence of the Ethelred Hotel became, for Sebastian, a countdown to a specific hour each day. His world, once measured in quarterly earnings and stock valuations, now recalibrated itself around the slow, steady progress of a painted forest growing on his promenade wall. The man who had once communicated through a flurry of emails and memos now found himself inventing reasons to descend from his glass penthouse. He would arrive at the mural site with a studied casualness, a man simply inspecting his investment, yet his eyes would inevitably find their way to the creator, not the creation. Lucia, for her part, remained a fortress of focus, but even the most dedicated fortress has its gates. She began to notice his pattern. At first, his visits felt like inspections and she would brace herself for criticism. But the criticism never came. Instead, he brought questions. He would point to a newly rendered thicket of ferns and ask, "Are those based on a real species?" Or gesture to a playful, half-hidden squirrel and inquire, "Did you have a name for him?" His questions were not those of a client, but of someone genuinely trying to see the world through her eyes. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to lower her drawbridge. Their conversation started as brief exchanges about the mural, but the forest she was painting became a gateway to the forests of their pasts. One afternoon, as Lucia mixed a particular shade of earthy green, Sebastian remarked on its depth. She told him it was the exact color of the moss that grew on the north side of the oak trees in her grandmother's village, a place where time moved as slowly as the drifting clouds. He listened, a strange longing in his chest. His own childhood had been a landscape of private tutors and sterile boarding schools, a world of manicured lawns where climbing a tree was considered undignified. He found himself telling her this, his voice low, the confession feeling both dangerous and liberating. He spoke of a life where his achievements were expected, not celebrated, and where his company was often sought for his name, not for himself. Lucia listened, her brush stilling. She looked at the man in the impeccably tailored suit and saw, for the first time, not a millionaire but a lonely boy. She told him about her family, who saw her art as a charming hobby at best, a foolish waste of time at worst. They had wanted a lawyer or a doctor, not a daughter who got paint on everything she owned and spoke of capturing feelings on a wall. They spoke of their dreams too. Lucia's was simple and clear. A studio of her own, a place filled with light and the smell of turpentine, where she could teach and create without apology. Sebastian's dream was a shapeless void he had never dared to examine. He had goals, ambitions, acquisitions, but a dream? He fell silent, having no answer to give her. Days turned into a week, and their time together became the anchor of their days. He started bringing her a cup of tea in the afternoon, learning she took it with honey and a slice of lemon, a small, intimate detail he filed away as something precious. She, in turn, started pointing out the day's progress to him, sharing her small victories and frustrations. The space between the scaffold and the marble floor became a neutral territory, a world of their own making built on shared confessions and growing understanding. The pivotal moment arrived on a Thursday evening. The hotel was preparing for a weekend gala, and the usual quiet was replaced by a distant hum of activity. Lucia, however, was in her own bubble of concentration, working on the most complex part of the mural, a cascading waterfall that needed to look both powerful and serene. She had stayed long after the day crew had left, the silence of the empty promenade her only companion. The only light came from the powerful work lamps illuminating her canvas, casting long dramatic shadows that made her painted forest seem to come alive. Sebastian found her there. He had not planned to come down, but a restlessness had seized him, a feeling that had become synonymous with thoughts of her. He carried a small paper bag containing a sandwich, having guessed she would have forgotten to eat again. He watched her for a moment from the shadows, a solitary figure bathed in a pool of light, a goddess bringing a world into being. He announced his presence with a soft call of her name, not wanting to startle her. Lucia turned, and the sight of him sent a warm, unexpected jolt through her. She was covered in a fine mist of spray paint and looked exhausted but exhilarated. "I almost have it," she said, her voice breathless with excitement. "The water. I think I finally figured out the light." He climbed the scaffold to stand beside her, the structure swaying slightly under his weight. From this vantage point the mural was breathtaking. He could see the individual brushstrokes that formed the roaring cascade, each one placed with intention and skill. "It's incredible, Lucia," he said, and his voice was full of genuine awe. "You're incredible." The air on the scaffold was thick with the smell of paint and their shared, quiet breath. The world outside their circle of light ceased to exist. As she moved to step down to grab a different brush, her foot caught on a loose tube of paint. She gasped, her balance faltering. In an instant, Sebastian's arms were around her, catching her, pulling her firmly against his chest. The sudden contact was electric. She could feel the fine wool of his suit under her paint-stained fingers, the solid strength of him. He didn't let go. Her face was inches from his, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. Time stretched and slowed. The hum of the lamps was the only sound. He looked into her eyes, a question burning in his gaze. She saw the man who knew the price of everything but was learning the value of things he couldn't buy. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. His kiss was not one of conquest but of discovery. It was slow and deep and achingly gentle, a silent conversation that spoke of all the words they had shared and all the ones still unspoken. It was a question and an answer all at once. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, the world rushing back in a dizzying wave. Wordlessly, he helped her down from the scaffold. He spread his suit jacket on the marble floor, and they sat together, their backs against the base of her beautiful, unfinished forest. He unpacked the sandwich and they shared it, their fingers brushing, their shoulders touching. They talked in hushed tones, not about the past or the future, but about the perfect, fragile present. They talked until the first hints of dawn tinted the high windows, painting the real sky in shades of rose and gold. The kiss had been a spark, but the long night of whispered conversation that followed was the kindling of a fire, a quiet, burning promise of something new and terrifyingly wonderful beginning to bloom in the heart of the silent hotel. The dawn that broke over the city did not simply bring light, it unveiled a new and tremulous world for Lucia. Walking away from the Grand Hotel, the chill of the morning air was nothing compared to the cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The magic of the night, of Sebastian's kiss and their whispered confessions in the dark, seemed to evaporate in the harsh, common light of day, leaving behind a residue of terrifying vulnerability. She had let him in. She had shown the lonely boy behind the millionaire's eyes the most fragile parts of her soul, and in return she had felt a connection so profound it left her shaken. But now, alone in her small apartment surrounded by the comforting chaos of her canvases, the old, familiar voices of doubt began their relentless chorus. He was Sebastian, a man who owned skyscrapers and could have anyone he desired with a mere snap of his fingers. She was Lucia, an artist who worried about paying her rent and whose finest clothes were permanently speckled with paint. What could she possibly offer him that wouldn't eventually bore him? Their worlds were not just different, they were from different galaxies. The memory of his touch, once so warm, now felt like a brand of impending heartbreak. She convinced herself that the kindness in his eyes was merely a moment's fascination, a rich man's fleeting interest in something quaint and novel. And so, she built a wall around her heart, a wall far sturdier than any she had ever painted. She stopped going to the hotel, sending an assistant instead to put the final touches on the mural. She let his calls go to voicemail, each one a fresh stab of pain she felt was necessary for her own survival. To love him and then lose him would shatter her. To push him away now was a pain she thought she could control. For Sebastian, the days following their night together were a descent into a special kind of hell, a hell of confusion and silence. The hotel, once his sanctuary of order, became a prison of echoing questions. The completed mural, a breathtaking masterpiece of light and memory, was a constant, painful reminder of her absence. He saw her in every leaf, heard her in the silence of the promenade. Her words echoed in his mind, her dream of a sunlit studio, her fear of being just a passing fancy. He replayed their last moments together, the trust in her eyes, the feel of her in his arms, and her subsequent disappearance made no sense to him. The corporate titan, the master negotiator, was utterly powerless. He could merge companies and broker million-dollar deals, but he had no blueprint for mending a broken heart, especially when it was his own that was cracking under the strain. His desperation grew with each unreturned message, each day of silence. He sent flowers, expensive, elegant arrangements that were returned to the front desk, unopened. He considered using his resources to find out where she lived, but something stopped him. It felt like a violation of the trust they had built. This was not a business acquisition, this was Lucia. And Lucia required a different kind of strategy, one not of force but of faith. He realized that words, all the eloquent pleas he could muster, would never be enough. He had to show her. He had to prove that he understood her soul, that his love was not for the artist he had hired, but for the woman who dreamed of a studio of her own, for the woman who valued truth over treasure. He finally discovered her address through the gallery that had recommended her for the job. He didn't call. He simply went, standing outside her modest apartment building, a man stripped of his armor. When she opened the door, her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and unshed tears. She looked as though she had been fighting a war inside herself. "Sebastian, please," she began, her voice trembling, ready to ask him to leave to end the agony. "Just hear me," he said, his own voice rough with emotion. He didn't try to push past her, didn't try to touch her. He simply stood there, his hands open at his sides. "You think I'll get bored? You think this is about my world and your world? You're wrong." He took a slow, deep breath, his gaze locked on hers. "My world was empty before you. It was a beautiful, silent, empty museum. You painted color into it. You brought the noise of life. You showed me what a real feeling was. You think you have nothing to offer me? Lucia, you are the only person who has ever offered me everything that actually matters." Tears began to stream down her face, silent and fast. The wall around her heart was crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. He reached into his pocket, and for a heart-stopping moment, she feared it was a ring, a grand, expensive gesture that would only prove how little he understood her fears. But it wasn't a ring. It was a single old-fashioned brass key. He held it out to her, its simplicity more powerful than any jewel. "This is not a key to my house," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is a key to a vacant shop on Elm Street. The north-facing windows catch the light all day long. The floors are solid wood and the space smells like potential." He paused, letting the image form in her mind. "It's for your studio, Lucia. Follow your dream. Build your own world. I believe in you more than I have ever believed in anything in my entire life. This isn't a gift from me to you. This is an investment in us. I don't want to just be a part of your life. I want to build a life with you. A real one. Let me be a part of your forever." Lucia stared at the key, then back at his face, at the raw, unguarded love shining in his eyes. She saw the truth there. He wasn't trying to buy her. He was giving her the tools to build her own destiny, and asking humbly to be allowed to stand by her side while she did. He had seen her deepest fear, of losing herself in his world, and his answer was to help her fortify her own. With a sob that was half relief, half joy, she reached out and took the key. Her fingers closed around the cool metal, and then she reached for him, her hand closing around his. "It's already ours," she whispered, pulling him into her embrace. Months later, the studio on Elm Street was no longer just a space of potential. It was a vibrant reality. Canvases leaned against sun-drenched walls, the air was thick with the creative smells of paint and clay, and Lucia's laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Sebastian, often still in his suit after a long day, would find her there, and she would show him her latest work, her hands stained with color, her eyes alight with passion. He had his boardrooms and his deals, but this here was his heart's true home. They had built a bridge between their two worlds, a bridge made of trust, respect, and a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger than ever. They had found their forever not in his world of marble or hers of canvas, but in the new, beautiful world they had built together, a world that started with a simple brass key and a promise. If you were moved by Sebastian and Lucia's journey from a lonely hallway to a shared forever, if you believe in the power of love to build bridges between different worlds, then you won't want to miss the stories to come. Subscribe now to ensure you never miss a single chapter of the romances that will touch your heart and remind you of the magic of connection. The house was perfect, or at least it had seemed that way when Mia first signed the papers. It was a cozy little place with sunny yellow shutters and a wide, welcoming porch, the kind of house that promised new beginnings and quiet mornings. But behind that cheerful facade lay a secret, a sprawling, messy, and utterly chaotic backyard. It wasn't just a little overgrown, it was a wilderness. Weeds stood as tall as her knees, a gnarled old bush looked more like a monster with tangled arms, and the only color was the dull, dusty green of plants fighting each other for sunlight and space. It was a jungle, and Mia felt a small, sinking feeling every time she looked at it. She had dreamed of a place to drink her morning tea and read in the afternoons, but this was a place where adventures got lost. She tried for a whole weekend to make a dent in the chaos. She pulled at weeds that stubbornly held onto the earth, she snipped at branches that seemed to snip back, and by the end of it she had a pile of green debris and a new respect for how wild nature could be. It was simply too much. With a sigh of defeat, she called her friend, who immediately said, "You need to call Elijah. He's the best. He can make anything grow." So she did, her voice a little hesitant on the phone. He listened quietly to her description of the jungle, and simply said he could come by the next day to take a look. The following afternoon, Mia heard the rumble of a truck pulling into her driveway. Peeking through the window, she saw a man step out. He was tall and solid, wearing a simple t-shirt and work pants that had seen their share of dirt. This was Elijah. He didn't march straight to the back. He first stood in the front yard, his eyes taking in the house, the trees, the lay of the land, as if he was reading a story written in the soil and the sunlight. When he finally walked around to the back, Mia was waiting by the door, her heart doing a funny little flutter she hadn't expected. He stood at the edge of the chaos, his hands on his hips, and let out a long, slow breath. He didn't say anything for what felt like a full minute. Mia held hers, waiting for his verdict. Finally he walked forward, not on the non-existent path but right into the thick of it. He knelt down, brushing aside some weeds to look at the soil beneath. He picked up a handful, letting it sift through his fingers. He examined the old, struggling plants, his touch surprisingly gentle on their worn leaves. He walked back to her, his expression thoughtful. "The soil is good," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that fit his steady presence. "It's rich. But it's too deep." Mia blinked, confused. "Too deep? I thought deep soil was a good thing." "It is," he nodded. "But it's full of old roots, from years and years of things growing and dying back. They're tangled deep down, taking all the space and nutrients, not letting anything new really settle in and thrive. It's not just about cutting what's on top. It's about digging all the way down carefully and clearing out the old to make room for the new. It's a big job. It'll take time." And that's when it happened. Mia looked from his serious, honest face to the wild expanse of the garden, and she didn't see a problem anymore. She saw a possibility. She saw a blank canvas, and this quiet, patient man was the artist. A slow, warm smile spread across her face, a smile of complete trust and a sudden, thrilling hope. She wasn't just hiring him for a job anymore, she was inviting him to create something with her. She looked right into his eyes, her voice soft but clear, carrying a weight he felt deep in his chest. "Then take your time," she said. "Fill me slowly so I'll never forget you." For a moment the entire world seemed to still. The birds stopped chirping, the wind held its breath. Elijah's eyes widened just a fraction. She was talking about the garden, of course she was. But the words hung in the air between them, feeling much, much bigger than that. They felt like a promise, a dare, the first sentence of a story neither of them had known they were waiting to read. He saw the sincerity in her gaze, the willingness to wait for something done right, something built to last. A slow, answering smile touched his own lips, the first she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face, making her stomach do a small, happy flip. He gave a single, firm nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "Okay," he said, the words simple but filled with meaning. "Okay, Mia. We'll do it right." And so, the next day the real work began. Elijah arrived early, his truck filled with tools, not loud, roaring machines but quiet, purposeful ones. He didn't attack the garden. He approached it with a kind of respect. Mia, working from her desk by the window, found her eyes constantly drifting outside, watching him. She watched the way he moved with a steady, confident strength. She saw the muscles in his back and arms flex as he worked a shovel into the stubborn earth, not with frantic force, but with a determined, rhythmic pressure that eventually always won. He would work on one small section for hours, methodically pulling out the deep, stubborn roots he had told her about. He treated each one, even the nasty, thorny ones, not as an enemy, but as a part of the garden's history that needed to be respectfully removed. He created neat piles of the old growth and carefully turned the soil, revealing the dark, rich earth underneath. It was hard, sweaty work, but he did it with a quiet focus that was fascinating to watch. During his breaks, he would sit on her porch steps, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. After the second day, Mia started bringing him a glass of cold water or iced tea. The first time he was so surprised he just stared at it for a second before taking it with a grateful, "Thank you, ma'am." "Please," she laughed, "call me Mia. Ma'am makes me sound like my grandmother." He ducked his head, a faint blush creeping up his neck. Mia, he repeated, and her name in his voice sounded new and special. The conversation started small, just a sentence or two exchanged with the drink. He asked her what she did for work, and she told him about her job writing stories for children's books. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You make up adventures for a living?" he asked, and the way he said it made her feel proud of her work. She, in turn, asked him how he learned so much about gardens. He told her about his grandfather, who had taught him that working with the earth wasn't a job, it was a conversation. "You have to listen to it," he said, looking out at the messy yard. "You can't just tell it what to do. You have to understand what it needs, what it wants to be." Days turned into a week and then two. A small, cleared patch near the house began to emerge, a perfect rectangle of dark, fresh-turned soil. It looked like a promise. One afternoon she came out and found him not digging, but simply sitting on the ground, sketching in a small dirt-smudged notebook. Curious, she walked over. "What are you drawing?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, and for a fleeting second she saw a shyness in his eyes, like a boy caught with a secret. Then he turned the notebook towards her. It was a simple, rough sketch, but it was beautiful. It was a plan for her garden. He had drawn curves for pathways, circles for where trees could go, and little boxes for flower beds. He pointed to a spot in the center. "I was thinking a small pond here," he said, his voice gaining a spark of excitement. "So you can hear the water. And maybe a bench right here under the old oak tree for reading." Mia's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. He wasn't just pulling weeds, he was dreaming for her. He was building the sanctuary she had imagined but couldn't create herself. She looked from the sketch to his face, saw the passion in his eyes, and felt a connection click into place, deep and sure. "That's perfect, Elijah," she whispered, and her voice was thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He smiled, a real, full smile that reached his eyes and made tiny crinkles at the corners. "It's a good start," he said, his gaze holding hers for a long, warm moment before he looked back down at his sketch, a new energy in his posture. The work continued, but the air between them had changed. It was no longer just a transaction between a homeowner and a worker. It was the beginning of something. It was the careful, patient tilling of soil, not just for seeds, but for a story that was just starting to take root, growing slowly, surely in the warm, promising sun. The garden, once a symbol of overwhelming chaos, now became the quiet, green heartbeat of Mia's world. The cleared patch of earth was no longer an isolated promise but the center of a growing transformation. Elijah's presence became as regular as the sunrise, his truck a familiar sight in her driveway, his quiet hum a comforting sound woven into the fabric of her days. The professional boundary between client and contractor began to blur, softening like the edges of a well-worn path. The glasses of iced tea on the porch steps became longer conversations. The shy nods evolved into easy smiles that greeted each other in the morning. Mia found her work schedule subtly shifting. She started taking her laptop outside to the porch, the tap-tap-tapping of her keys composing a gentle rhythm alongside the scrape of his shovel and the rustle of leaves. She watched, utterly captivated, as his sketch became a reality. He wasn't just planting flowers, he was building the bones of the garden. He brought in smooth, flat stones and laid them into a winding pathway with a craftsman's patience, tapping each one into place with a rubber mallet until it sat perfectly level. He built a small, rustic trellis from cedar branches for future climbing roses, his strong hands bending and securing the wood with a quiet confidence. Mia learned the names of things from him, not from a book, but from his low, steady voice pointing them out. She learned that the bright purple flowers were called salvia and that the feathery green plant was asparagus fern. He explained why he was planting lavender near the porch, to smell its fragrance on the evening breeze, and why he chose certain hardy shrubs to form a protective wall against the wind. One warm afternoon he was preparing to plant a young, delicate cherry tree, its roots wrapped in a burlap bundle. The hole was dug deep and wide, and he was carefully mixing a special blend of soil and nutrients at the bottom. Mia came down from the porch and knelt in the grass beside him, wordlessly offering her help. He showed her how to gently loosen the roots at the bottom of the sapling so they could spread out and seek water. Their fingers brushed as they both steadied the slender trunk, and a simple accidental touch sent a jolt of warmth through both of them, a silent, undeniable spark that made Mia's breath catch and Elijah's hands still for a moment longer than necessary. The air between them felt suddenly charged, thick with something unspoken. They lowered the tree into its new home together, their shoulders almost touching, the silence between them louder and more meaningful than any words could have been. The garden was becoming a living, breathing entity, a shared creation. It was no longer her garden but the garden, a project that belonged to both of them in a way that felt profoundly intimate. They started sharing more than just the space, they started sharing pieces of themselves. During a lunch break on the porch, sitting on the top step with sandwiches, Elijah told her about his dream to one day have his own landscaping business, not just doing jobs but creating beautiful, personal spaces for people. He spoke with a quiet passion that was entirely different from his usual reserved tone. In return, Mia confessed her secret ambition to write a novel, not just children's stories, but a real, grown-up book about love and belonging, a dream she had been too nervous to voice to anyone else. He listened, his full attention on her, making her feel like her dream was the most important thing in the world. As the days grew longer and warmer, the garden flourished. The salvia bloomed in vibrant spikes, the lavender bushes buzzed with bees, and the cherry tree held its own, its leaves a hopeful, bright green. The final piece was the small pond he had sketched. He lined the hole with a heavy, flexible liner, arranged stones around its edge with an artist's eye, and filled it with water. The next day he brought a small, simple pump. When he plugged it in, a gentle trickle of water began to flow over the stones, a soft, soothing sound that instantly made the garden feel complete and magical. The evening the pond was finished, they stood side by side, watching the water ripple in the fading light. Fireflies began to blink like tiny, living stars in the deepening shadows. The garden was perfect. It was everything Mia had ever wanted and more, a testament to patience and care. Elijah turned to her, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. "It's a home now," he said, his voice low and filled with a deep satisfaction. "Not just for the plants. It feels like a home." He looked at her, really looked at her, and Mia felt her heart begin to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Just like my heart," he added, the words so soft they were almost carried away by the trickle of the water. "It feels like a home now too. Because of you." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Mia didn't move. She watched him come closer, her world narrowing to the warmth in his eyes, the scent of fresh earth and clean sweat on his skin. When his lips finally met hers, it was not a question but an answer. It was gentle and sure, a soft, searching pressure that sealed every unspoken word that had passed between them over the weeks. It was a first kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming, a natural, inevitable culmination of all the trust and tenderness they had built together. It was sweet and warm, and it sent a wave of pure, radiant happiness through her entire body. That kiss opened a floodgate of a new, deeper intimacy. After that, his hand would find hers naturally as they walked the stone path. He would wrap an arm around her shoulders as they sat on the new bench under the oak tree, her head resting comfortably in the crook of his neck. They spent long, lazy evenings in the garden, talking for hours about everything and nothing, their conversations meandering like the path he had built. They shared stories of their childhoods, their past heartaches, their biggest fears and their silliest hopes. The physical space between them disappeared, replaced by a profound emotional closeness. The cozy nights on her couch, tangled together under a soft blanket, simply talking or reading in comfortable silence, felt more intimate than anything she had ever known. It was a closeness that went beyond the body, it was a meeting of minds and souls, a deep and abiding trust that made them feel for the first time truly seen and completely, utterly safe. The garden was complete, and in its beautiful, blooming heart, so were they that a full cycle of seasons had turned since that first chaotic summer day. The garden, once a wild and forgotten space, now stood as a vibrant, living tapestry of color, scent and memory. It was no longer just a garden, it was the soul of the little house with the yellow shutters, a testament to patience and the profound power of gentle hands. The cherry tree Elijah and Mia had planted together now stood a little taller, its branches a little stronger, a promise of future springs filled with a blizzard of pink blossoms. The pond, with its endless, gentle murmur, was the heart of the space, a constant, soothing melody around which the rest of the garden danced. Mia spent every moment she could there, writing her novel on the bench under the oak tree, the very spot he had drawn in his sketchbook. The story she was writing about love and belonging no longer felt like a distant dream, but a story she was living with every breath she took. Her love for Elijah was as deep and settled as the roots of the oldest tree, a quiet, constant force in her life. Elijah felt it too, this sense of profound rightness. His own landscaping business, once a fledgling idea shared only with Mia over lunch on the porch steps, was now beginning to flourish, its first clients won over by his quiet passion and undeniable skill. But no matter how busy his days became, his evenings were always reserved for this garden, for this home, for Mia. Walking through the gate felt like stepping into a different world, a world they had built together from nothing but stubborn soil and a shared hope. He would find her on the bench, her head bent over her laptop, or simply watching the birds, and his heart would swell with a love so fierce and protective it nearly stole his breath. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond thought, that he wanted to walk through this gate with her for the rest of his life. He began to plan. The ring he chose was simple and elegant, much like Mia herself, with a single stone that caught the light like a dewdrop on a petal. He knew exactly where he would ask her, and he knew he would not ask her alone. On a perfect, golden afternoon, when the light was soft and honey-colored, he enlisted a conspirator. He led Mia into the garden, his hand warm and sure in hers, telling her he wanted to check on the health of the rose bush, the very first one they had planted together, the one where their hands had first touched and a spark had leaped between them. As they approached it, Mia noticed a small, folded piece of paper tucked amongst the leaves, its corner fluttering in the gentle breeze. Curious, she reached for it, unfolding it to find a message written in Elijah's familiar, sturdy handwriting. It read, "This is where my heart first knew it was home. Look by the pond." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning excitement. He just smiled, a secret, loving smile, and nodded toward the pond. Hand in hand, they walked the winding stone path, the same path he had laid with such painstaking care. By the pond's edge, where the water made its soft, musical sound, another note was waiting, wedged between two smooth stones. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "This is the sound of my happiness," it said. "Now look to our bench." Her heart was pounding now, a joyful, frantic rhythm. She turned to look at the bench under the oak tree, the place where they had shared countless conversations and comfortable silences. A third note was clearly visible on the seat. She practically floated towards it, Elijah walking steadily beside her, his arm around her. This note read, "This is where I dreamed our future. Now my love, look right here." As she read the last word, she turned to find him no longer standing beside her, but down on one knee before her. In his hand was the small velvet box, open to reveal the ring that glittered with the reflected light of their garden. His eyes, full of love and unwavering certainty, looked up into hers, which were already filling with tears of overwhelming joy. "Mia," he began, his voice thick with emotion but clear and strong. "You asked me to fill you slowly so you'd never forget me. But you have filled my whole heart so completely, so wonderfully that I could never, ever live without you. You're my home. Will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife?" The world narrowed to his face, to the love shining in his eyes, to the profound truth of his words. There was not a single moment of hesitation. "Yes," she cried out, the word bursting from her with all the force of her love. "Yes, Elijah, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around, their laughter mixing with the sound of the pond and the songs of the evening birds. Their kiss was deep and full of promise, a seal on the future they were now embarking upon together. They were no longer just two people in love, they were partners, a team, a forever. Months later, under a canopy of woven branches and fairy lights in that very garden, they were married. Their vows were exchanged not in a grand church, but under their oak tree, surrounded by the fragrant blooms and rustling leaves that had witnessed their entire story. Their friends and family were there, but it felt as if the garden itself was their most honored guest. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Elijah and Mia stood hand in hand, looking out at their creation. It was not a static, finished thing. It was alive. It would change with the seasons, some plants would fade and new ones would be planted, the trees would grow taller and cast wider shadows. It needed constant care, attention, and love to keep it thriving. They both knew, without having to say it, that their marriage would be exactly the same, a beautiful living thing that they would nurture together forever. He pointed to a quiet corner, a spot that still lay empty, waiting. "I was thinking," he said softly, his voice full of a new, tender hope, "that we could plant a tree there. A strong one like an oak. One that will grow as our family grows. Its roots will go deep into this ground just like our love. It will be here for our children to climb, and for their children to play under." Mia leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. She looked from the empty spot, a symbol of their future, to the vibrant garden around them, a symbol of their past, and then to the man beside her, who was her entire present. They had built this beautiful world together, one patient day at a time, and they would continue building it forever. If you've been swept away by the story of Elijah and Mia, If their journey from a tangled garden to a love that would last a lifetime has touched your heart, then please consider joining our storytelling family. By subscribing to the channel, you'll ensure you never miss the next beautiful, heartfelt romance we bring to life. Your support helps us continue to create these tales of connection and forever. Subscribe now and become a part of our growing community.